starting with the biggest, gnarliest, most impactful problem statement isn't always the right place to go, right? And so bet small is something that we often use as counsel and guidance, not only for ourselves, but for our customers.
Welcome to Socially Conscious AI, where we showcase innovative AI applications for social good and interview the experts and thought leaders shaping the future of AI with a focus on ethical and inclusive practices. I'm Roman Bercot. I'm here with my co-host, Valencio Cardoso.
Hi, Roman. Today we're joined by Duncan Mundell, the head of Invent at AltaML. With over 25 years of experience in business, technology, and consulting, Duncan is now spearheading innovation and solution development at AltaML. His leadership is focused on driving value and excellence across all facets of the Invent division, with a commitment to responsible AI practices and impactful outcomes. Duncan, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
Duncan, I first became aware of your work at Microsoft's Build conference this summer. I was watching one of my projects get demoed, and then I was lucky enough to catch your interview about the Coastal Resiliency Project. And I've been dying to talk to you ever since then. I'd like to start by just getting to know you a bit better. What was your journey to joining AltaML?
As an early graduate into the technology space many decades ago, I started my career selling computers and dial-up internet. That's how far back I go. One has to fund one's way through university, and that was one of the strategies that I had. And it taught me a very, very valuable lesson, even way back then. One of the things I discovered, and it's been a passion of mine ever since I started, from those days forward, is it wasn't so much about selling something to somebody as opposed to the experience that you took them through and the customer service that you gave them afterwards. And they would always come back, time and again, if they got a good experience. And the sale itself was just a blip in the radar. So that's the origins. I studied a business degree at University of Cape Town, which I was very fortunate to be a part of. Spent many years, in fact, most of my career consulting. So I have lived in London, UK, lived in New Zealand, and now most recently in Canada. Just prior to joining AltaML, my last few roles at Microsoft, which were a delight and fascinating. Just so many smart people where you learn so many amazing things. Really focused in on the customer success part of the business and ensuring that our customers were not only just delighted with the things that they had purchased and were trying to implement, but had a good experience on the way through.
So recently, though, you've chosen to become head of Invent at AltaML. Can you tell us a bit about AltaML and what sets them apart in the AI marketplace?
We are an applied AI shop, boutique consulting company. We use the term, or we use the phrase, we build AI software and we build AI companies. So on the Invent side of the business, which is what I run, is the boutique consulting. Really, at the end of the day, is our job is to help our customers and clients, so large organizations wanting to make better decisions with their data. What does better mean? Well, that depends on what folks are trying to achieve and do. And generally, it's more accurate, faster, and derives more value from that data. It always comes down to probably one of three things that they're looking to achieve, which is how do we create more value in the organizations? Generally, that's how do we drive revenue? How do we eliminate cost from the system by being more efficient and focusing people on more high value work? And then there's a risk element in there as well, which is a little bit more difficult to define. But how do we adjust risk posture appropriately by leveraging applied AI solutions?
Duncan, I understand that you're involved in several projects that leverage AI for social good. Do you mind sort of sharing some examples of some of these projects and some of their impact?
I'd love to. It's my favorite topic, having just joined the company 6 months ago. Getting exposure to some of the things that we've built with our clients and truly impactful things is quite fascinating and a privilege to be a part of. So Roman's mentioned the Coastal Resiliency Program at MS Build recently. So here's an interesting and materially difficult problem to wrestle with, right? If you think about the civil engineering space and the opportunity for natural disaster to negatively impact human life, and what goes into building large civil infrastructure near the coastal regions of any particular country. And the things that you have to consider, which are quite gnarly and quite varied in terms of what mitigation systems do we have to put in place, what are the things we have to think about. This coastal resilience tool set has traditionally been run and modeled on very outdated physics supercomputer models, right? So when we talk about coastal resilience, really what we're trying to understand here is how high and how big a surge will be. And then from a surge, how far will that water travel inland based on the shape of the coastline or the river system or whatever it might be. These physics models, which have been the standard for decades, take upwards of hours to run just a single iteration of a model. So if you're thinking, I would like to build, a large civil infrastructure, whether it's a village or a strip mall or something that is, within a coastal region, there's the insurance that comes with it, the decisioning that you're making around understanding the impact of water. There is the what do I put next to it or behind it or around it in terms of, can I put living space and housing next to this civil infrastructure, whatever it might be. And so there's just this concentric circle of impacted decisions based on just picking a location and understanding how the water and the weather will impact it, right? And these models, while very accurate historically, just run in a very outdated and outmoded way. And so we worked with our partner and client to rethink how we use technology to run these models. And, in our first experimental releases, we took a multi-hour model and we brought it down into almost real-time analysis of the ebbs and flows of water in a coastal system, which is pretty phenomenal. The efficacy of the model was not quite as good as the physics-based model, but it was very early prototyping. And you think now of the benefits to not only this client who uses this very materially in generating their own business, but think about disaster response, right? So if you've got a hurricane that you're tracking in and you want to understand how to, early stage warnings or place infrastructure or disaster support, you can do very quick if-or analysis on how big is the storm going to be, how large does the surge get, how far will the water travel, and then you can plot multiple paths. Hurricanes in our part of the world are notoriously unpredictable in terms of how they travel, and you're now able to do if-or analysis in almost real time to help make good decisions in a disaster relief and a disaster response scenario, which was something that wasn't necessarily considered as part of the original scope, but became more and more evident as we started to build this thing up.
Ever since Hurricane Helene hit, I've been really curious to know whether an AI or machine learning model that's built on data is able to deal with things that are frankly unprecedented. That was the word that, much like the pandemic, was repeated over and over in the news. This is unprecedented. And so I'm curious whether the Coastal Resiliency Project was used regarding Hurricane Helene, but then also just in general, how can AI models that are based off of data be predictive when something is essentially completely unprecedented?
I can't speak to its use in Helene specifically, but if you think about some of the models that we're creating, it's about understanding the impact of very specific inputs, and then those inputs become the levers for the model to start predicting, right? And so regardless of whether a storm is unprecedented or not, if you look at the things that we're tracking and we're using in terms of time series data, it really comes down to water flow, right? How high will the surge be, right? And so we can infer a bunch of things from that. And then how far will it travel based on the shape of the land. And as I said earlier, whether it's a river system or a coastal region or whatever it might be. The team continues to drive efficacy in the model closer to the accuracy that you would get from a physics-based model, and are having great success in that. But we're constantly learning, and I think this is the key, right? We work in a by nature non-deterministic outcome-based technology, and so the training is the key. And every time we use new data sets and every time we do new things, the models get better and better, and that is just a well-proven and well oiled machine, for want of a better term, in terms of how we make these things better and more accurate.
And I imagine that by making these models run more efficiently, more quickly, then that gives you the ability to run more predictions, lots more scenarios. If this happens, then this is what it might look like. If that happens, that's what it might look like, in a way that we haven't previously had the capacity to do with just the strictly physics-based models.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? If you can take a multi-hour model and run it in near real time with the equivalent of 1 or 2 GPUs of compute power, we're running it on really, really high performance but high efficient systems compared to what we would be, historically. And so all of a sudden you have a model that is historically has had a single use, because the time and complexity of setting it up and running it and the expense of it, it literally runs on the equivalent of a supercomputer. And so these things are not cheap. The advent of being able to run this kind of model on a much more performant, cost-effective set of infrastructure suddenly opens the doors to things that you wouldn't have considered beforehand, like for analysis and scenario analysis in a semi-real-time mode when you're doing things like disaster response right in the middle of a hurricane, for example.
As you develop the initial model and trained it on this set of information, as more information comes through, not only is it becoming more accurate, but then it's also opening up new possibilities to go and track other things and be paying attention to other things. So it's opening up new dimensions for you guys.
If you think about the origins of the need, it was cost reduction, right? If I have to run a multi-hour model on a physics-based model on a supercomputer, I mean, I don't know what that costs, but you can bet that it's not going to be cheap, right? And so it was probably, as a tool, it was probably used sparingly and precisely, right? And so now you have a tool that is much more generally applicable simply because of its accessibility from a cost perspective. That unlocks the creativity of, well, how else can I apply this? And how do I make it generally applicable? So instead of having a model that's tuned very specifically to one region of the world and one pattern of weather, for example, how do I generalize that now and make it available, for example, as a platform, right? And make that platform accessible to the people who need it when they need it. That's super interesting, right? And so you start to incrementally define the future of where you're going with this thing based on what you read.
I know we've thrown out the term responsible AI a few times, right? I would love to hear from your perspective what it means to you and how AltaML incorporates some of these principles into their projects.
To me, it's just about being good humans, right? Elevating human potential with responsible AI is what we do at AltaML. Technology is an enabler of the human condition. You can use it for good, you can use it for bad, you can be somewhere in the middle, it can be purposeful, it can be by accident. And that's always been the case. And you can argue that any tool that can do damage or create good could be used in that way. I think the thing that makes responsible AI so important is the speed with which it can happen when you bring AI into the mix. So the ability or the likelihood of things to go off the rails materially, right, becomes far more visceral because of the speed at which we're operating. Speaking for Duncan now, humans are inherently lazy, right? For the most part, there's a small part of us all that's kind of lazy, right? And so I see this future where if you don't have something like responsible AI, people put a system in place thinking it's going to have a deterministic outcome every single time, traditional software paradigm, highly reliable, and then leave it alone. And then 6 months, a year, however long it takes for that thing to drift off course, suddenly something really bad happens because somebody hasn't been paying attention to it because they got kind of lazy, right? And so for me personally, RAI is an absolute bare minimum to start the conversation. That's what it means to me, and that's what it means to AltaML. Internally, we have a position where if a client that we are looking to work with doesn't have RAI principles aligned to our own, we won't work with them, right? And so it's super interesting when you start talking about responsible AI, because there's lots of really good material out there on the theory of what good principles are. the applicability of those principles, but the rubber hits the road when you have to make hard decisions, right? And we do a lot of advisory work, particularly with chief exec officers and boards. And one of the most important things that we help them to understand is you've got to have responsible AI policy. You just have to, right? It's just good business practice. Good business practices make good things happen for you as a business. But understand that they will get tested. And you have to have the conviction of your responsible AI policies to say no to something that might be financially very lucrative to the business, but contravene, your position and stance on responsible AI. And at some point, you can bet that that's going to happen, and somebody's going to have to make a hard decision, and you need to be able to make that decision objectively and well.
A lot of people theorize about this, but like when it comes to actually practically making decisions around it, that's when you see the difference between like people's philosophies and application of it, right? And it just reminds me of this like getting into tech, right? It was like move fast and break things in the startup world, right? It doesn't work like that over here. When it comes to AI, it's think through things and set up the responsible guardrails from the get-go, and then figure things out as you're going along.
You have to have a solid launch platform from which you go from, right? And if you don't have that, you might get away with it. I mean, you could build your RAA processes and policies as you go. I think one should always be open to iterating on your policies and principles and directives. As you learn new things, you can update your position on what our responsible AI is and isn't, because it's not in the binary decisions where it's a problem. It's in that super gray area. I mean, I remember years ago working for Microsoft, and a certain industry that shall remain nameless came to us and said, hey, we've got this really good idea. What we want to do is we want to use artificial intelligence and social economic data that's publicly available to target at-risk populations to buy our product more. Now, it doesn't take a big leap of the imagination to understand, A, who that industry is, and B, why this was a really bad idea. And I'm very proud to say it wasn't even a short conversation at the time with Microsoft. Microsoft, did so much foundational work in setting up this concept of responsible AI and democratizing AI. And this is going back at least 10 years. And so, those big binary decisions where you just look at it and kind of go, oh, no. Who wants to be a part of that, right? Like, can you imagine? But it's in those gray areas where, we were talking recently. I'll give you a good example. How do you reconcile addressing model bias? Bias will creep in no matter what we do. I mean, like every day we work in systems that aren't AI and we're biased, right? So the reality is there's just bias everywhere. How do you reconcile, or how do you address model bias with data, right? And training data. But that training data is inherently, as a part of it, got protected status components to it. And what I mean by that is, either personally identifiable, or it's identifiable in a way that's, contentious or politically sensitive, or whatever it might be, right? So for example, in healthcare, if you have a model that predicts the outcomes of patients who have cancer, but there are populations in the world who might be more susceptible to cancer, or might be more susceptible because of their inability to access the healthcare system appropriately because of who they are, where they are, and their sort of economic situation. If you're not capturing that data, which, it's quite difficult to do. We're like, hey, you are a part of a demographic which is underserved and a minority group, and it's actually illegal for us to identify that in the data. How do I address your needs appropriately if I don't have the data points to understand where the bias is creeping into the system? And so there's this really interesting challenge, particularly with data and data capture, of how do we get access to data that has the right components and right characteristics that actually allows us to ethically model things that are really important and impactful, but are modeled based on things that are really, really sensitive and private. And it's not a solved problem today by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a really good example of where you're in this gray area, and having a solid foundation of responsible AI allows you to have a very good conversation and discussion around how you would solve that problem in a meaningful way.
At AltaML, you have environmental projects, you have healthcare projects. I'm curious whether you have faced challenges particular to having such breadth of types of work that you do.
As much as Gen AI has done amazing things for advancing the popularity and public awareness around artificial intelligence, as an applied AI shop, we do much more than Gen AI, as you can imagine. But your average citizen, when they talk about AI, really, I find anyway in my discussions, mean Gen AI. Right? And so the challenges that we encounter, one is that, right, is if you're talking to, for example, large organizations, one of the challenges that I see is we have this hammer called AI, and we're just looking for nails. And we just don't know how to apply the tech. We know we've got to do it because everyone's talking about it. Everyone else is doing it. And so, help us with that. And so there's this applicability barrier where folks are asking the question, how do we use it for, something meaningful and material? So that would be the first thing. The second thing we find is people or organizations are quite often thinking too big at the outset, right? So they're looking for that massive problem that's just going to completely change the business or disrupt the industry or whatever it might be. And that's the first project that they want to go after from an AI perspective. And, we have to guide and counsel them to say, well, I mean, as you're building fluency in your organization, AI fluency in your organization, perhaps we should start with something smaller, right? Just to learn, get to understand what the challenges are, what your data estate looks like, what your change management might be. So people have a very visceral reaction to the things that you can put in place. And, a lot of it comes from a position of fear, right? So will AI take my job? And so, starting with the biggest, gnarliest, most impactful problem statement isn't always the right place to go, right? And so often bet small is something that we often use as counsel and guidance, not only for ourselves, but for our customers, where you go and learn how to do this well. It's almost like that skunkworks model back in the days, right? Where you learn how to do things well with AI. And once you raise the fluency in your organization, more broadly, what we find is the population in the company or the organization start to bring the good ideas, as opposed to you running around looking for, an AI nail with an AI hammer.
Sounds like really wise advice that you'd be giving to clients to help them, find an important problem, but something that's feasibly solvable and not just trying to take on the whole world all at once. I imagine you do quite a bit of educating and consulting to clients to help them refine their approach. Are there other bits of advice that you tend to find yourself offering quite a bit these days?
We spend quite a lot of time doing advisory work, as I mentioned earlier, to sort of boards and executive leadership, just to give them a sense of, we do a little bit of, the art of the possible, a little bit of myth busting, what it is, what it isn't, which is very well received. The other thing that we see too often is, or hear too often is, I need to do AI, right? And, internally I die a little bit every time I hear that, because it's kind of like, well, it's not a stick that you whack your organization with, right? AI is not a thing that you do to the organization. It's something you build as a fluency within your organization. And make no mistake, 10 years from now, the most successful companies will be the ones who are AI fluent, right? Both at a business level, but also, at a personnel level. The people that you attract and hire and grow in your business will be AI fluent. And to some degree, will expect the organization to be AI fluent when they look for a job, right? So think forward when candidates are interviewing for a job and they ask you, what is the AI fluency in your organization? What tools do you use? And how pervasive is AI? Because I'm actually looking for that, right? That's the future we're heading into. It's remarkable how often AI use case development or ideation starts without a business problem and is treated like a pure technology play. And it drives me bonkers, right? Where organizations are like, I've got to do AI. And you're like, well, sure. But I mean, let's make sure that you're using it for the right reasons. How about we start with a business problem? just start there. And then let's analyze whether AI can, address the business problem in a meaningful way. And is the return on investment significant, right? And this is the other thing is a lot of folks are starting out because they're treating it like a technology project. They aren't asking the question around what's the return on my investment here? Is it a 10x return? Because if it's not a 10x return, maybe it's not the right business case, right? And somewhere in the middle of that 10x return, which could be a $100,000 investment to get $1 million return, which is a bet small, bet often strategy, right? And then fast forward into your, hey, we're a mature organization. Could we bet $1 million to get a $10 million return because we've done this, 20 times and now we know what we're doing and what we're in for. But not starting with a business problem is a really, really bad way to waste your AI budget and get very little return from it.
The startup advice for so long was get out of the building, but with AI, Gen AI especially, there's so much opportunity within the building just to internally improve processes, make things more efficient, reduce some of the grunt work that people are ultimately wasting time on when they could be doing much bigger and better things. That advice to build your capability internally with a business problem, that's well worth the price of admission right there.
And the last thing I'll leave you with is there's this fallacy that you can do it all yourself, right? I've got a data scientist over there who can also do, front-end coding, integration work, and has started reading, machine learning textbooks. And so there's this concept of a unicorn data scientist, right? And organizations like, no, we don't need your help. We don't need your help because we have got the unicorn data scientists over here, and that small team, one person, whatever, whoever they might be, are not well equipped to do all of the work, the complex work that is associated with implementing something that is AI driven effectively. It's an impossibility. No one human is that good. You must find partners that you can trust, right, in the ecosystem who will help you. And by help you, I mean be effective in choosing the right AI use cases, right? So what is the nature of the business problem? Is it big enough? Is the ROI there? And is it feasibly and technically viable as an opportunity in front of us? And your partners need to be brutally honest with you when you're evaluating that sort of potential roadmap of AI use cases so that you can quickly cull out of the use case catalog things that aren't going to give you the material return and aren't going to waste your time and money, because that's a really good way to disenfranchise not only your organization who don't want to participate in stuff like that anymore, but your executives who are very quickly going to be like, well, this obviously is just another technology fad. And so we're just going to take that budget back. Thank you very much. Right. Like that's not a good place for anybody. Right.
I imagine like your stance on like responsible AI probably has a positive or it has an impact on the type of talent that you attract and retain.
As somebody who's got to the point in my career that I have, you have a much greater clarity of the things that are important to you. When I was looking at the opportunity to work with AltaML, there were a couple of things that stood out for me. One was, here is an organization that culturally aligns to my core values, right? Core values like integrity, core values like family, funnily enough, right? And loyalty. And so here's an organization that just fits really, really well with who I am as a person. Two, there's as an organization, very open to everybody participating to that culture or participating in that culture rather, and contributing to its ongoing growth, right? And for me, that's one of the most important things that any leader can bring to an organization is your ability to continue to nurture and grow and influence the culture. And so as a company of roughly 100 people, the opportunity to do that is quite unique. As we look to staff and bring talent on to address the question more specifically, I believe, and we see it in the people who apply and who work with us, increasingly, particularly younger workforce, are looking for employers who give them different things to, employers from 20 years ago, right? They're looking for similar things. Can I be aligned to a company that, matches very well to my ethical sort of background? Can I do impactful work? We actually hear this all the time. Folks are coming in asking could I be on a coastal resiliency type project? Could I work in your healthcare practice? Because I have a deep belief that I'm destined to do societal level stuff, right? And impact. These are the kinds of questions that folks are asking now coming into the workforce. We're beautifully positioned as an organization, culturally, but also in an applied AI focus to do some of those things. And the responsible AI conversation is right at the front of all of that. When you lead with a position of maturity and responsibility and ethical, um, you know, just a strong ethical stance, people see it and people like it and they gravitate towards it, right? And they want to be a part of it. And so we attract enormous amounts of exceptional talent as a result of it.
It's easy to see why the projects that you've been talking about are really exciting, and the potential to make an impact. I could see where a lot of people would really want to get into that. I'm curious, where could people find out more about your projects at AltaML? And for that matter, is there in the upcoming projects that you are able to forecast for us?
Watch the space. We're redoing and revamping our outbound marketing right now, and including our website, so altaml.com, which will be a showcase for all of those highly impactful and really interesting projects and AI solutions we're working on with our customers, the ones we're allowed to speak about publicly anyway. In terms of, what does the future bring? Our strategy, sort of leading statement is elevating human potential with responsible AI. We're, as an organization, looking to measure ourselves against impact statements like, planetary level things that we've done. So, for example, we're working with the Canadian Space Agency right now on a endangered whale species model, which is super cool. And it's not just super cool because it's helping to save the whales, which, I mean, that doesn't get, more planetary than that, really. We're also doing some really interesting things around how do we train models with generated content, right? So now we're starting to get into some really interesting space with this client where the imagery that is available to us to train the model is very scarce. And so it becomes quite difficult to train the model. And so we're actually doing some experimentation with them to artificially generate content to train the model, right? And so there's this really interesting, don't get it wrong, because now you have a feedback loop that becomes a bad place to be, but really innovative stuff around artificial content creation to train the model so that the model gets better. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we've got some pretty exciting stuff that we're doing in healthcare, particularly in cancer care up here in Canada, where we are looking to materially change patient outcomes by using AI in appropriate ways to help patients, have a better experience, earlier detection, precise medication. There's so many opportunities in the medical space and particularly in the cancer space for us to just get better at it so that we can, identify problems earlier, treat them more precisely, and get people through to healthy much faster and more effectively. Not only is that good for, the humans, the good humans who are suffering through these medical crises, but it's just good for the system, because if you can be better, more efficient, and smarter with how you treat with precision, you relieve the burden on the system itself so that you can, more effectively treat a broader set of people, right? And so there's some really interesting things that we're doing there, which right now we can't talk in great detail about, but there are promising things to come for sure.
For you personally, do you socialize online? If someone wanted to continue the conversation with you, do you connect online?
I do, absolutely. I think, like most of us, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. I generally keep it to LinkedIn from a business perspective,
Sure.
and I lead a fairly private social life, if you will. I'm a bit of a social troglodyte, but when it comes to the interesting things we do, the easiest place to find me is definitely on LinkedIn. Very happy to engage. If it's just a general outreach to get pointed in the right direction, we're more than happy to do that. And in fact, all the AltaML is in the company who are on LinkedIn happily would jump in and offer assistance and guidance should you reach out and ask. So perhaps we can get a trending hashtag of some kind on LinkedIn with like ask AltaML or something, and then we'll see what happens.
Well, again, Duncan, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed our time together. Thank you for making the time to meet with us.
Sometime in the future, we can come back and revisit some of those futures that we talked about, and we can have a bit more of an in-depth conversation on some of those.
Thanks for joining us on the Socially Conscious AI podcast with our amazing guest, Duncan Mundell. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And why not share this episode with someone who could benefit from this conversation? For Roman Bercot, I'm Valencio Cardoso. Until next time, stay curious and stay conscious.